Okay, so it is a sizzling hot summer day in August, this past August to be exact. And I and my wife Lauri are heading out to go get groceries. We just returned from a family vacation when we make an awful discovery. I have lived in my neighborhood for 23 years in Natick, Mass. I fell in love with the neighborhood as soon as I drove into it, and I've had all my firsts happen in that neighborhood. It was my first home, my first marriage, and then I got my first dog. You know, when you're in a neighborhood, you meet all the dog people. And then I decided to have my first child. And when they handed him to me at the hospital and told me to take him home, I was panicked. I thought to myself, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. But thankfully, there were other people in my neighborhood that didn't know what they were doing either. So I bonded with them. And we were able to, learn how to be parents together, which was pretty amazing. And I decided to do it again and again with 2 more children. And then, unfortunately, I also experienced my hopefully first and only divorce. And my neighbors were also amazing partners to me in that. All of them knew my ex-husband and were connected to him, and they were kind to both of us in the process. And then they helped take care of me and my kids when I needed someone to run to the bus when I was running late for work, or when I had to take one of them to the emergency room, and I didn't want to take all 3 of them because that can be a nightmare. And they were just always there for me, and that was the experience that I always had in my neighborhood. And then 5 years ago, when I met Lauri, much to their surprise, I brought home Lauri, and they fell in love with her. In fact, I think they like her better than me. So I'm kind of working on that. I got to figure out how to get back on the top side of that deal. But anyway, they just have always embraced me. So that day, when we were heading out for the groceries, Lauri spotted that our peace flag was missing. We had hung a rainbow peace flag a couple months ago, and it was gone. And the 2 of us were standing in the driveway, looking at each other, trying to figure out some sort of reasonable explanation to not be the explanation we were fearing most. I was reeling, because I was like, how can these people around here have done this? Someone around us doesn't accept who we are. And there had never been any signs of it, so I was purely shocked. And then out of the corner of her eye, Lauri saw the front of our home that was covered in eggshells. The 2 of us went and stood in front of our house, and I kid you not, my daughter's window upstairs covered in eggs, our bedroom window, my daughter's bedroom downstairs, my family room, my front door, and my front porch. Eggshells, and it's August, right? So they are baked on. And they've been there now for a few days because we were away. And I don't know how to explain the feeling that happens. There are experiences in life that this happens to us, but where all of a sudden, everything changes. I've never been a victim of prejudice before, truthfully, not anything like this. And so I'm reeling, trying to make sense of it. But what I notice out of the corner of my eye is that Lauri is going through a completely different experience. She's pacing back and forth, and I can see the years and history of shame and pain emanating from her body. And she's trying to keep it together as we both try to figure out what we're supposed to do next, but we are shocked. We're trying to understand what you're supposed to do in a situation like that. Now, Lauri came into being a young gay woman in the 80s and 90s. So if you remember back then, it was a time of huge fear and homophobia. HIV crisis was just taking hold, and people were petrified. So the last thing she ever wanted to be was gay. And I knew some of her stories and some of her background, but what I was witnessing showed me that these waters were running deep for her. Me, on the other hand, I kind of came in the back door, and I realized about 3 or 4 years after I got divorced that I was attracted to a woman. And of course, you know, what we do in midlife crisis, I started having conversations with myself in my head. I'm like, this cannot be happening. I just finally got over that other major crisis, and I'm getting on my feet, and I tried to talk myself out of it. Well, like those crises occur, you don't end up really doing that. And I decided to open up and accept it, and thankfully I met her. And so we both came from very different places. So as we stood in front of our home, taking this all in, it occurred to me that we would do what a lot of people do in these crises, is that we got busy. Like, we're like, okay, what needs to be done? She called the police, and she spoke to them. I got on Facebook, and our neighborhood has a Facebook group, and I let them know what happened, and I asked anybody if they saw anything. And pretty immediately, people were responding with the same kind of shock and dismay that we had. Many comments, like, I can't believe this would happen there. So that was making me feel better, but at the same time, I was very deeply in the reality of what was happening. And so I grabbed scrub brushes, and I grabbed soap and pails, and I went out to the front of my house with Lauri. And in some sort of weird, cathartic way, we thought if we could just scrub the egg off of our house, that maybe this wouldn't be happening to us. We scrubbed and we cried and we processed, and we just were filled with pain and shame and anger and confusion and frustration. And my neighbors, 2 of my neighbors came over and checked in with us and said, oh my gosh, we are so sorry. We haven't seen anything, but we're here, we're concerned. Tell us about where you got the flag. And we got to start to understand as we spoke with them that, you know, what was happening in their neighborhood around us, like they were still there for us, but we were very much alone in this experience. So we kept scrubbing and we kept, you know, toiling over this, because apparently eggs on the house is a very bad thing. It destroys wood. So we literally scrubbed for 3 hours, and it looked as if we did nothing. And as we were completing the job, though, our neighbors came back. We had heard kids in the background kind of whizzing by on bikes and scooters and doing things, but that's an everyday occurrence in my neighborhood. That's one of the things I love about it. And we heard, they all came over to our yard. There was probably about 8 kids and 3 or 4 adults. And they came to share the news with us that they had just distributed 22 peace flags and that they were hanging in the houses in the neighborhood. Now, to kind of go from a place of just complete low despair to have that experience, I mean, we were just emotionally overwhelmed. The tears were streaming down our face. We hugged them, we thanked them, and we really got present to the fact that what we had believed about this neighborhood actually was true, and that, you know, maybe we would wade our way through this and everything was going to be okay. And so we finally went out to the grocery store that day, and when we got into the car, we drove by the Mazzolas with the peace flag, and then we drove by the O'Donohues with the peace flag, and the Kellehers, and the Hamlins, and one house, the Bermans, one house after another with peace flags on trees, peace flags on fences, peace flags on doors, peace flags on flagpoles, even a peace flag hanging at the end of a sailboat mast out into the middle of the street. I can't describe how overwhelmed with love and kindness we felt in that moment. Now, 22 peace flags in the neighborhood in that period of a couple of hours. And the story continued. Over the next week, there were 68 peace flags hanging in our neighborhood. By the time the neighbors came back from vacation or wherever they were that weekend, they got on board. And we were inundated with support and stories from our neighbors about how they connected to the story. Our Jewish neighbors talked about how important it was for them to hang that flag because they had their own meaning. And our African American neighbors talked to us about how important it was to hang that flag for their own reasons. And we really felt like this richness. I even had my neighbor Caroline, who is in her late 70s, oxygen dependent, literally almost pull the oxygen tank out of her house, trying to get to us as we were walking our dogs to find out where she could get her peace flag. It was profound. So ABC News decided to do a story on the whole thing, and they interviewed us. which was pretty interesting and obviously very raw, because we were both like in despair in one moment of the conversation and then like in like complete like universal love in the next moment. And the thing about it though is Facebook got it, and which is where Matt found the story. Millions of people watched it on Facebook, and thousands of comments came in across the world. Lauri and I had the opportunity to understand what this story meant to people around the world. So for us, it was so deeply personal, but then once it went viral, it was like, oh my gosh, this story held such a sense of hope around acceptance and community that people were not connected to in their parts of the world. We feel privileged and so full with great gratitude that we could connect with these people. And you know, it's funny because when we talk to our neighbors now, here it is 6 months later, they say to us, you know, we don't understand, like, you know, what's the big deal? It's just, of course it's what we would have done. And I said, that's when we get the opportunity to share with them, well, from the stories we heard, it's not what people feel around the world. And maybe there's a lot of lucky people out there like us that have neighborhoods or communities that support them in this way. But I really saw what a gem we live in, where we live. George Taki actually shared the story again about 3 weeks ago, and another 5 million people saw it again, and we got another slew of thousands of comments. And so the type of person that I am, I'm always like, so what do you think this means? Like, why do you think this happened to us? Like, I've always kind of been like that, ever since I was like 5. I wanted to know the meaning of life and how it all worked. And, you know, some people would say it was a random act to us, but to me, I really look at it like this. I had a deeply profound experience that connected me to how millions of people across the world feel. And it allowed me to open up my heart to understand that. Not only to those strangers that I don't know, but also to my wife. Through this experience, I learned so much more about her shame and her pain. And truly, not only did what this neighborhood do for us transform our experience, we do not think about what happened to our home anymore. Well, especially since like 2 months ago we got it painted, but we really don't. Most people who are victims of hate crimes live in fear and anxiety for the rest of their lives. What our neighbors did transformed the experience, but not only for us in that moment, but also for Lauri in a lot of the pain of the past. It renewed her sense of hope and what people can be. And then for me, I'm this, you know, I'm a meditation teacher and I'm a spiritual person, and I talk about us being connected, but it was the first time that I really got that these random individual acts of kindness erased an act of maliciousness and fear that would have completely changed our lives. And so this connectivity around this neighborhood, which then spread out to the connectivity around this whole world, really helped me understand that what I do does matter to the person that I sit next to at work and to the person that I see on the bus. And that there's this part of me that feels deeply connected to understand how I can continue to pay it forward. Thank you.